Welcome to Season 2 of Under the Sisterhood. Over the 31 days of March, we are celebrating 31 Women's March of Voices during Women's History Month. We will have intimate conversations that will uncover each woman's superpower and find out how they use these superpowers to help other women. That's 31 days honoring 31 women and their superpowers. This is a podcast to celebrate women and all that they do in our world. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. Let's get under the hood. Today, we're celebrating Becky Chidester, a mother, daughter, sister, friend, women's advocate, thought leader, and healthcare marketing executive. Becky is a visionary leader. During a journey that included founding and serving as CEO of Wunderman Thompson Health for more than a decade, she has developed a particular interest and expertise in motivating action in the areas of health and wellness and of women in business. Currently, Becky is providing executive-level leadership as a strategic advisor to entrepreneurial startups and continues to mentor women around the world. I couldn't be more delighted to be celebrating Becky during Women's History Month, as she's been making history for so many years. I'm just so happy to be having this conversation today.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. It absolutely is a pleasure to be with you and to be, marching with the voices of the other amazing women that you have been celebrating this month, and certainly honoring Women's History Month.
Yeah, and it's such an important month. I think that, in the past, we see it, we hear it, we're in companies, we're leaders of companies, and we do a little something here and there. But now sort of living and breathing this experience of really giving voice to all of these women and their amazing stories and all of their everyday qualities that are, in everyday ways where they're doing these remarkable things. So it's just, for me, it's such a wonderful thing to celebrate each and every one of you and have this time to get to know you and hear your story. So if you're good, why don't we get going?
Sure, would love to.
So we know this big question is, what's your story? But I think what's really important, Becky, is like where you start and where you go and how you take us on the journey.
Well, I feel very, very honored to be able to share my experiences with you and those that are listening to this. So, when I think about my journey, I think it would be helpful for me to start with where I'm from. I was born and raised in Gary, Indiana. And for those not familiar with that city, it actually has the honor of being named one of America's most abandoned cities. I think it has something like 13,000 abandoned structures.
Wow.
But I know it's sort of a, I mean, we could spend the entire podcast talking about, what happened to Gary, Indiana. But the reason why I bring it up is because when I was growing up, its notoriety was really the diversity of the city. And of course, the fact that the Jackson Five was from Gary, Indiana as well. I mean, I never had the chance to see them.
Easy as 1, 2, 3. I remember them in real life, in cartoons, in every aspect. So, that must have been amazing.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, well, I think they were getting their start as I was like, getting my start in life. All right, but but again, Gary, it was elected the first African American mayor, and it certainly was in the center of the whole civil rights movement. And the reason why I start my story with Gary is because I grew up really learning about inclusion and collaboration at such an early age. As someone that was involved in student government, it took time, right? And a lot of listening to build trusting relationships with such a diverse student community. And, no doubt about it, that experience, really shaped my sensitivity to what it takes to make people feel that they belong. So again, it really was a very solid, foundation, and I think it taught me a lot about being an active listener and even thinking about inclusivity. So fast forward, I went to college and I moved to Washington, D.C. right after college and worked on Capitol Hill. And then soon after Capitol Hill, I joined an agency that specialized in grassroots communication. So that agency, which is, was an early pioneer in the use of data and personalized communication. So when I think about my start, those two jobs, Capitol Hill and that first agency job, again, really taught me to be an active listener, to sort of build upon where I grew up. And I think we all sometimes, especially as we're working on performance evaluations, et cetera, we all sort of use that word freely, active listener. But I'm not talking about just conversations, right? And listening to people, but really watching behavior. And in our case, was using data to analyze trends, to understand personal motivations, as well as listening to what people were saying and what they weren't saying. So those experiences not only, I think, made me a better marketer, but it really taught me to connect with people in personal ways around what they cared about and their motivations. And that, of course, really formed my leadership style and approach.
So I want to, if it's okay, I'd love to interject there. First of all, I think it's really interesting to, at such a young age, have that sort of DE&I experience, which would have been in the 60s. And it's important to highlight that. That
Not in the
is
60s. Don't make me
70s,
that old.
sorry, 70s, apologies, 70s, I apologize. Audience, if you're listening, my bad, the 70s. But I think it's really important to cite that, because for you to talk about that at this stage of your life, that you had that experience so sort of changed or set up the type of person, the way you think, your thought structure, your patterns, the way you listen. And I think there's another word, you're an active listener, but you're also a generous listener. A generous listener is just absorbing all of the information without necessarily giving advice. But I think, just when I hear that, I think, wow, to like know that at that young age and to be inspired and motivated by that, by what you were surrounded with, and how do you navigate those dynamics is really extraordinary. And then, so you were, in a way, you didn't even realize this, you were a pioneer in DEI and B, because you really understood that without understanding all of those dynamics, the belonging would never happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And as I said, it really, I think, understood how to build trust. In order to be able to do that, you really had to relate to, what people were feeling. I mean, again, I think in those early days that I talked about, I also, on my Capitol Hill experience, as well as that first agency job, I did door-to-door canvassing. And, you talk about an experience where you have to really connect with people around their needs and motivations and, and personal interests. I would encourage everybody to do that, at some point, because it's very, it's very humbling. But as I said, it's really necessary if you want to create a situation where people feel, that they are included. And actually, if you want to inspire them to, to take some form of action, which was really what my job was all about, is inspiring people to do something. In that case, it was more for, political purposes or public affairs. But eventually I used that skill set really in, in a marketing capacity.
I think that's amazing. And I can see you going to door, and I think there's something I want to highlight here with that, because there's another side of it. You or the person knocking on the door, asking these people in their homes to talk to a stranger about something. There has to be something about you that gets them to open up, like walking in and giving them a sense of trust immediately, that they would want to share any ideas they had with you. So however you're presenting information, you have to present something for them to respond to something, but creating that safe space to have that conversation door to door, back in a time when it was just a different time, is pretty, and it's pretty interesting, because as I hear you describe your early part of your life, the way I've seen you as a leader, it's just such a natural thread. So I'll let you tell your story, but it's like, wow, it all makes sense.
Well, like I said, it was a very important building block, and that's why I wanted to, to start with that. So that agency that I mentioned, I eventually became the CEO of that agency and was put in that position at a very young age, in my early 30s. So, many people will say to me, well, why was I selected for that job? And, certainly there were more people within the agency that had, greater experience. But that agency had a wonderful, vibrant culture set by the, previous leader. His name was Mike Graham. And as he was moving up within the organization, we were acquired by WPP at that time. So as he was moving up within the organization, he saw the need to put somebody at the helm who would not only continue to drive growth, but to do it in a way where to build on the success that we had of having a very strong and positive culture. So I am happy to report that actually did happen. The agency continued to grow and to thrive, and a big reason for that was people really felt motivated and connected. The culture was maintained. But I also should acknowledge that while we had a lot of success at the agency, and being put in that job in my early 30s was challenging. I have to acknowledge that definitely had some confidence issues as a result of, like I say, being put into the top job, when with relatively little agency experience. But that position, I think being put into that leadership role, and I often say to women, seize the moment, that that you're not always going to feel ready for these positions, but that is a way that you grow and develop, is to take on and stretch yourself. And that was certainly the case for me. And what I learned out of, as a result of taking a leadership role at such a young age, is it really, I think, formed my leadership style. So I didn't care so much about the title. I didn't care so much about the position. What was really motivating for me in being in that role was enabling others to be their best, and to really work as a cohesive and motivated team. And I do think that when I fast forward to, if that was my first leadership job, to ultimately 20 some years later, as I took on more responsibility, that I think that orientation of how can I be an enabler to allow people to really do their best and be successful, has been something that has has stayed with me from that time forward.
Actually, yeah, and I was fortunate enough. I worked with Becky for a brief period for about 3 years in the early 2000s at Wunderman, New York, and she was a tremendous leader. I think one of the only women and leader in the executive leadership team. But she'll talk about that. I do want to highlight something that's really important to me, which just occurred to me as you're describing yourself, because you said when you were in this leadership position in your early 30s, and I think the reason why you're put in that position was twofold. You're a tremendous natural born leader. Like your sense of empathy, your sense of what's going on around. You may use the word enabler. It's almost like you're this corporate leader combined with this woman of service, which means you're there to help people shine and be their best selves, and help companies and organizations, your clients, everybody shine and thrive. And so as a leader, I think that they saw, not that they wanted to continue the vibrant culture, but they saw the capacity you had in you, and the style. And I think that is just something that you should be really proud of, because I never thought of leadership quite that way, but hearing that you really have been a woman of service as a leader, and within big organizations, to really help other people show up as their best selves.
Yeah, and I think right now every leadership organization out there talks about authentic leadership, right? So I'm, cautious in using that, because I do think it's out there a lot. But I think my goal was, in fact, to be an authentic leader, which for me meant that I wasn't going to try to be, and to replicate and emulate the styles of others, right? So I wanted to continue to be true to myself. So what did that mean? That meant I needed to be assertive, but I didn't have to be aggressive. It meant that I needed to be charismatic, especially because I worked in an agency environment where that was important, but I needed to be charismatic, but I didn't have to take all the oxygen out of the room. So
Mm,
again, I think rather than feeling I had to emulate some of the styles that were there in terms of other leaders running agencies, I think, continued to be true to myself, and lead in the way that had been successful, and that ultimately what I felt would achieve the right results for the organization.
that's, yeah, that's amazing. And I think that I like the fact that you didn't lose yourself in the process. I think the best thing is when leaders can show up as their authentic selves. And yes, you're right. It's an overused phrase. It's something that you've always been. I've always thought of myself as an authentic. I'm just who I am. I'm not going to change to fill some sort of slot of what I should be. And I think, to be honest with you, that's what makes the cultures of companies, are the leaders, the people who show up at the top. We role model certain behaviors, and we either show up with integrity and grace, and behave certain ways, or we don't. And I think that everybody has different styles. So I think it's remarkable, because it's easy to get sucked up into what other women may be doing and how they're successful, or even men for that part. How do you lead? Do I need to be more aggressive like a man to be able to be successful in a man's world, in a patriarchal system? Or can I show up and understand, how do I play in the same sandbox and be assertive, but also know when I can sit back and just really observe and listen? And I think that you've been, not to compliment you too much, but you were masterful at navigating all,
Yeah,
and that's really a wonderful quality to share with women, that you don't have to go at it like that.
yeah. I mean, but I will say that I also had to develop and evolve. I think one of the things that that was, I think, an important milestone in my career is I was fortunate to go through a program that WPP sponsored. It was called the X Factor, and it was led by Charlotte Beers. And one of the things that she had you do, which I often encourage other women to do, is she had you conduct interviews with your superiors, with your direct reports, with friends, with other partners within the organization, so that you could really hear in their language how you are perceived. So, the good news is I heard a lot of things that really did reinforce, as you might have reinforced, some of the attributes that we talked about. I heard empathetic, I heard, genuine, authentic, right? But I also heard a lot of people describe me, and I think a big part of it was because of the type of jobs I had. I was always sort of put into these organizations to fix and transform them. So as a result, what I also heard how people described me was like, fixer, operationally oriented, which again, I also think women have, sometimes, have that reputation, because we get in there and we do things, right? And we're not always perceived as the visionary, all right, of the organization. We're perceived as somebody that is more operationally strong. So when I went through that exercise and I heard that, I made some real deliberate changes in my career path about what I could do, so that I would start to really get the reputation of being, more of a visionary than somebody that was just operationally strong. Now, again, this wasn't to say that I wanted to walk away from those strengths, but I wanted to make sure that people saw other talents and capacities in a capacity that I could bring forward. So that exercise was incredibly helpful. And I often tell women to do that as you're sort of really trying to understand your personal brand, and trying to understand, what you want your brand to be.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, that's really a helpful thing, to certainly learn about yourself. And I love the fact that you decided that being operational wasn't enough. to be perceived, of course. And that's the thing. That's the thing that kind of stinks in the business world is women have so much capacity in so many ways. Not all, please don't get me wrong, not all, but most women have so much capacity. If they are mentored, if they're groomed, if they are given opportunities, they can show up and they will most likely be very operationally sound, but that does not exclude the notion of being a visionary and thinking about what's next, whether it's in the company, whether it's with people, or whether it's with a client or within an industry. So I think that's really fantastic. I think there's something else, and we've talked about this before, but was the power, recognizing as well your power and your ability to influence things. And I think that what I always noted is that you had a very you were very graceful in your leadership roles. I always saw you as having so much integrity and grace, the way you carried yourself, the behaviors you role modeled. And talk a little bit about that power and influence. And do you think it was because of that? Like, I kind of see that you build the trust, you build these characteristics as a human, and then it gives you power, influence. Talk to us about that, Becky.
Yeah, I think particularly when you are in a senior position, you do have power and influence. I think for me, it was really recognizing what I could do with that. And so that was a key initiative for me, was to take my leadership. You pointed that out. I was the first woman to be on the executive board at Wunderman. And so I used that position to create, which was, I called it at the time, Women at Wunderman. We ultimately, I think, renamed it to something else. But I really used that platform to make sure that the organization was going to have a sustained commitment to helping and developing women. So that was one way of using my influence, which was a fairly significant effort. And I think fast forward to where the organization is today, that WPP 40% of the people in executive positions are women. So I think certainly I wasn't the only one, right? But I know that I played an instrumental role in making sure that commitment was there. And again, and using the role and the influence that I had within the organization, to do that. And maybe I was going to also say, that was a commitment to professional development. But I think used the influence to make sure that that the organization was sensitive to the needs of women with families, right? And we sort of one part of my chapter that we haven't talked about is when I got that first CEO job, I was just starting my family. I had two sons. In fact, my youngest son, Philip, was literally born right about the time that I became a CEO. So as you can imagine, it certainly wasn't easy to be a CEO, young female, right? A lot of responsibility, and to also strive to be a present and engaged mom. I have a great husband, who has been an incredible partner to me. So that has really definitely allowed me to take on more of my professional dreams, and to deliver on my professional goals. But I also, like I said, back to the point about influence, but I also really, I think, tried to use my position to make sure that the organization recognized what women need as they are trying to balance these multiple roles that they have, and the various hats that they wear. Again, it's not to say that men don't have those responsibilities, but I think we all know that women really, I think, carry more of that, and organizations, I think, really do have to be sensitive to that. That's certainly something that we're seeing play out as a result of the pandemic, being a topic that that I think this topic has really got more awareness as a result of the pandemic.
So and couldn't agree more. And we can talk more about that in a minute. I do want to acknowledge something about you that I think is really interesting. In a company, in an organization like WPP, which was very, listen, I was at Wunderman for 7 years. I was at another WPP company for a couple of years. So in my tenure, maybe 10 years at a WPP company, which is fantastic, great company, I think what was really interesting as I was hearing you describe it, Becky, was really the fact that whoever was the leader, whoever you were reporting into, whoever at the very top level, they saw you, they heard you, they listened. You were seen, you were heard. And when I say heard, because you can't affect that change, you can't make a women in Wonderman happen if you're not being seen and heard. It doesn't happen that way. So I think that's I mean, it's so friggin' powerful. We don't even realize that you're probably one of the first, certainly within WPP, to do things like that. And so I think that's really important. Now take that, here we are today, to your comment about, the pandemic, the different needs for women today, the burdens that they're carrying, what has happened in the pandemic as it relates to you as a leader. Talk about your thoughts on that, because I think it's really interesting.
By leader as what?
Well, as a healthcare executive, so
Yeah.
I know that you have thoughts on this, the pandemic, what it's meant to women, the impact on that.
Yeah, I think again, the good news is that the pandemic, I think, has made all organizations more conscious of, of the needs for women, particularly as, the Great Resignation was real, that women really, I think, we all saw that women decided to, leave organizations because the burden of caregiving, right, and their own needs, I think, became so significant as a result of being at home that, that they didn't feel that they could or wanted to do both. So I do think that, in this chapter, myself and, many others have really, I think, started to think about how do we create an environment that's going to be supportive of women, right? And I think that's not just hybrid working, but that's also still making sure that this hybrid working supports women not only in terms of work life issue, but still their professional ambitions, right? When I think one of the things that we've seen as a result of kind of this hybrid working is there are fewer sponsors and fewer mentors for women. And, and that was one of the things that I was really working with WPP on. How do we make sure that we still maintain that? Because I know how important it is for women to advance, to really have that level of mentorship and sponsorship within the organization.
And I know, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think, if I recall correctly, I know that you worked on this amazing initiative. What was it called? Pass It On, which was about elevating women. I want you to talk about for a minute, but I do want to say something that I think is really interesting. You were again onto something and recognizing an unmet need within women, which is really about us elevating each other. We're only as good as the next sister, if you will. So talk about Pass It On, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So again, I mentioned that the initiative that I started out with was Women at Wunderman, and then we, ultimately renamed it and and refocused the effort to be around Pass It On. So it was not only just empowering and developing women, but it really, put a great deal of energy around ensuring that women, are helping other women. And that can be everything from, opening doors for other women, about playing, a mentoring role for other women, and, I think if you're in a senior leadership position, it means giving recognition and exposure to other women. It might mean, really encouraging women to take on roles and responsibilities that will grow and develop them, maybe in areas that they don't even realize that they have strengths in. But you as a leader will, I think, see those things. So I think the Pass It On initiative was definitely to also encourage women to support other women. but but the way that we did it is in all the areas that I talked about. It was, it was not just providing mentorship, but it was really ensuring that if you were in certain positions, that you would take the effort and the initiative to really bring other women up within the organization, as well as, just help their wellness and, mental well-being. I know you and I, for example, had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where we asked one another about our health checkups, right? And it's things even like that. It's, just making sure that, as a friend, we're encouraging one another to take care of ourselves, that we're, we're there when we're feeling up, we're there when we're not feeling, so up. I mean, it's all of those things where I think, women can make a difference. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why I'm so thrilled with what you're doing in building sisterhood, because I think that is, can have make such a meaningful difference for women. I think what's the line? A woman alone may have power, but together we can have impact. So again, I think sisterhood is absolutely going to make a huge difference in, in how women live their lives.
Well, I can attest to that personally. This experience, this journey that I've been on, doing the podcasts and meeting the women and meeting the young women from all the developing countries it is filling my cup in ways that I can't even imagine. And I want to say something, Becky, back to pass it on. I only wish like that I could have been part of that experience and really been part of the organization at that time to experience pass it on, because that is just such a it's such a wonderful initiative on behalf of women. And I mean, it seems like pass it on should be well beyond a WPP or Wunderman initiative. This should be pass it on, it should exist in the world in a bigger way. Because if women just supported women instead of felt anything other than support, the world would be so much better, because women are already doing so much. Imagine the embrace of another sister, and imagine how much we can, back to that quote that you said, the impact we would have by doing it together. So that's amazing. I don't know if there's anything more you'd like to share with your journey and your story.
Um, maybe just what I'm doing now, right? So, I
Awesome.
mean, obviously, yeah. So I, feel very fortunate that I had, this incredible career at WPP. But I also, felt that I was ready for another chapter. I mean, the more I learn, the better I feel about myself. So I'm, working now as a strategic advisor and mentor, as you stated in the introduction. And I'm working with a variety of companies, but certainly with a deeper commitment to helping women entrepreneurs. So I also think that when you get to a point in your life where you feel that you feel very comfortable with what you're doing, sometimes it's worth kicking that chair out from underneath, so that you really grow and develop and can contribute in very different ways. And that's exactly what I wanted to do.
It's interesting. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I had an interesting conversation a few days ago, and one of the women said, I felt like I was in this leadership position. There was no opportunity for the people below me. I was in the position for too long. So I opted to make a change. Now, I never thought when I left my position, it was more the feeling of inertia and the restlessness to what else could I be doing? I'm not growing anymore. I felt like I was just inert, and what's the opportunity? So I totally get that, and that restlessness, that wanting to affect change. And for me, it was on the ground. For you, being able to impact all these organizations and bring your strategic advisory roles and your board roles will just be tremendous. In particular, supporting women owned organizations, because that again is actually that's actually bringing your pass it on methodology into your life. You're living it, you're role modeling it. So I think that's just wonderful, Becky.
Exactly, because I think where I see the need is not just mentoring, women through that, through the business process, or customer discovery process, but it is it's helping women network and, and build the right connections. So I spend, probably at least 10-20% of my day, really, I think, working with the women that I am supporting and seeing how I can build, greater community and greater connections and greater, and a bigger network for them. And that's truly pass it on.
I love it. You are such a leader. Oh my goodness, you're an icon in my world, Becky Chidester. Anyway, I am going to ask you the next question, which I love this question because we get to know so much about you amazing women. What would you say your superpowers are? And plural, the word, it's powers with an S, not one, many.
I think I'm going to probably reinforce some of the, some of the things that you've heard earlier, but, there's no doubt about it. I have been told that I have a high degree of emotional intelligence. And I think, probably many women have these strengths, but the superpower for me has been the convergence and the intersection of emotional intelligence, empathy, if you will, with leadership. So what do again, what does that mean? That means that I really feel that my strength has been able to bring people together to accomplish, big goals. I am very goal oriented, but I also recognize that I have achieved success by enabling others to be their best. So that, like I said, it's not just the fact that I'm empathetic and I can relate and understand, the needs of a lot of people, but it's the combination of that with leadership, I think, that has really allowed me to, empower and to help people, bring their own individual success, but in fact, to bring that forward in an organization. You said superpowers. I think the other thing that I would say is I do have the ability to lead with a level of calmness, right? And I've sailed many ships into the storm, and I've dealt with a number of different challenges, including challenges, as I said, challenges of being kind of the sole woman in an industry. It's changed a lot in the last 10 years, but certainly when I was kind of coming up through the ranks, there weren't many women in leadership positions. And I kind of, as I said, navigated through those challenges in a very calm way. And I believe with leadership, your leadership in tough times will either cause people to lose hope, or it'll instill confidence and positive change. So for me, all those qualities have been able to drive a level of, change. What I like to say, and again, you addressed that a bit in the introduction, is a real strength is using those talents to inspire and motivate people to act, and that is probably what I'm the most happy about, is to break that inertia and actually get people to, to do something that's in their best interest.
I love that. And back to that earlier comment I made, tremendous leader that you are, in combination with being of service to the people you lead, has been such a beautiful quality. And that is because of your emotional intelligence and your empathy. And to your point of being a calm leader, when you are going through, we work in a business that is incredibly stressful, and your team looks up to the leader to be that guiding light or not. And that's hope. We're going to get through this. We have some tough times. And those are the people who stay on the ship playing the violin the whole time. And then the others flee and they get off the ship. And so it's really up to a great leader to keep them on the ship. There's one other quality, and I don't know if you were going to continue with one thing I noticed, which we've talked about earlier, is your listening skills. And you use the word active listening, but I think you're also a generous listener. You don't always feel the need to comment. You are always there as a safe space to have a conversation. And that's a gift. That's a gift. Attach that to a leader, and it's like you can make anything happen, because when you hear people, when you listen, when you watch their body language. There's a great John Navarro book. He was in the FBI about body language. when you watch their body language, you listen for what's being said, what's not being said. As a leader, you can affect change there because you're in a position of influence and power. You can pull those strings to either, pivot one way or another, whether it's with an individual, with an organization, with a piece of business, whatever it may be. So I think that, I mean, it's a wonderful quality to have as a human being, as a woman, but as a leader, it's particularly an excellent quality to have, because when your people feel heard at the various levels, that's what gets them to want to be part of your organization and stay within your organization. So I think it's really important to highlight that, if you don't mind.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So how do you, so now you have to add this one in. I'm sorry to give you something to think of, but I think the listening skills is something not to take light. It sounds like a light, we would talk about a soft skill. It's actually a hard skill. It's actually a fantastic skill. Lucia Cantor St. Amour's book, the For the Forces of Good, the superpowers of everyday negotiation, gets into active listening, not really generous listening, more active listening, but how to use that type of skill set in a position of negotiation. That's another thing as a leader. But as you think about these qualities and these superpowers, how do you use them? How do you use your superpowers, Becky, to support and really help other women?
Well, I've done it organizationally, as we talked about, right, with initiatives like Pass It On. I've done it, to help women. I think not only get the recognition or open other doors, but believe in themselves. I continue to hear confidence issues when I work one-on-one with women. And it could be just something that we're more sort of wired to be, to have self-criticism, right? But I also think in organizations, because we have different styles, different leadership skills and different styles. If we're trying to, if we're trying to emulate something that doesn't feel comfortable, that can also create confidence issues. So I do a lot, I think, to help women really feel very good about themselves, right? And so that they see the positive contribution that they can make. And that really takes me to storytelling. I spend a lot of time, doing fireside chats and doing storytelling, because exactly to this point, I know that sharing these personal experiences help women, one, build confidence, but two, break down barriers, deal with, work-life issues. I think that for women, having, these role models is incredibly important. And, absolutely, it's one of the reasons why, again, that I think what you're doing is so important, because for women to see these role models, not just the famous ones, right? The ones that get a lot of attention, but those that have influenced in more subtle ways or have done it as part of a team, which has been something that I've also wanted women to really appreciate. Goes back to sisterhood, is that what can be accomplished if you're focused not just on your own achievement, but if you really are focused on what can we do collectively.
Mm, I love that. That's wow. And yeah, no, I mean, you've done amazing things and you'll continue to do that because that's just kind of in your DNA, really supporting and helping women. You seem to derive a ton of pleasure out of it, like it's important to you. And it's interesting because you gave birth to two, you're in a family of men. So it's wonderful that you've continued, because it's easy to get caught up in all of that and lose sight of what we need to do for each other as sisters. So
But if I may,
you may.
so I, grew up brothers, sons, but I have an amazing mother, right? And that is just, she's accomplished so much in her life, but such an unsung hero, right? So she joined the military because her family was too poor to pay for a college education. She became a teacher when I was in kindergarten. At 93, she's an amazing golfer. She, 2 years ago, she had her, hole in one. So for my mother, I think that role model wasn't just so much what she accomplished, but her love of life, her desire to learn and grow and give. Again, she chose a teaching profession, and some of the things that she's done even after she's retired, continues to demonstrate a real commitment to give back. So I might have been surrounded by a lot of men in my life, right? Many great men, but I do believe I have an incredible role model with my mother.
That is so beautiful. That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So we're coming to a close, which makes me sad because this has been wonderful to see and hear this side of you. If you would, I mean, this is a platform for you, Becky, to give a message to women around the world of all ages, of all backgrounds, as long as they identify with being a woman, and of all cultures. What do you want to say to women around the world?
I would tell women to truly give time to self, relationships, and your career. I mean, I think again, women are in service of others. That, and we shortchange and many times ignore the time for ourselves and relationships with other women. Now, I'm not a big believer in kind of the whole work-life balance. I think that I actually hate that phrase. I think it creates this sort of unhealthy conflict. But I think that giving time to and making sure that you're giving time to those three aspects, relationships, and that very much includes relationships with other women, self, which I think women really need to focus, and be deliberate about, as well as career. As I was going through this transition, someone offered a book to me called The Three Marriages, and it's by David White. And it really, in fact, talks about that. So, my advice would be to make sure that you are deliberate around those three marriages. And then, if I may, one other piece of advice that I would give is, in fact, pass it on. Because as we said, I truly believe that strong relationships and support are needed for change. And I also believe it will lead to greater happiness.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And it's on behalf of women. So it's like it's helping your fellow sister. What how much better can you feel about doing and being of service to others in that way? So wow, this has been just amazing. What a great conversation. Thank you so much, Becky. I'm so thrilled to be celebrating you during Women's History Month. Thank you for sharing your story, your ideas around being a woman, and passing it on.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Again, it's such an honor to be part of this celebration, and thank you so much for everything that you are doing. To shine a light on these accomplishments. I know it'll have a profound impact on many women around the world. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Zach Slaff, and edited by Zach Slaff. The music is by Ayla Schaefer, her song, Rose.